actually just flip the little viewfinder around and then see what I was doing instead of having to like hit record, walk in front, record a minute of it, come back, check it to see where I was, how the alignment looked. And yeah, that was the start.
Yeah, so so many people think that when they want to start something, they have to kind of jump in and have a lot of funds and and a lot of equipment and stuff. But really, and especially I think right now, and this is one of the things that we're all figuring out, is that if you've got a laptop, if you've got an iPhone or a cell phone, you have a video camera and you can reach an audience. And I think that that's one of the things, like for me, I've always wanted to do more online stuff for people, but I've always been so busy teaching that I haven't had the time. And so for me, this is forcing me to learn new skills. And I've been doing Zoom. In fact, I just realized I wasn't recording when we started this one, so we might have to go back and put the first 5 minutes in. But it's a learning curve. And the only way you get better at something is to do it. And I know so many people are afraid to make a mistake. So I'm sure you've made a lot of mistakes as you started this process. Can you tell us about something that didn't go quite so well?
Oh, well, the very first foray into it was the part that really didn't go well. So actually before, like several years before I even approached you and we did that first course together, when I first decided I was going to do content online, I kind of went all in. So I hired a video production company, had a crew come out. I hired a web builder to build me this website. And basically I had to take out a small business loan to do this. And what I failed to anticipate was that it takes practice to actually put it on video and to present information in that kind of way. So those videos are terrible. I mean, we keep them in the archives to laugh at sometimes, but I ended up only trying to use them for, I think, about 6 months. They didn't work at all from a sales perspective. I ended up just kind of giving them out to clients that I had personally. But I was so tense and uptight in those early videos that I joke around like I looked angry in every one, and I memorized it like these scripts, so it didn't go well at all. That was the biggest mistake, and that set me back. It took about 2 years of work to recoup the investment I had made in that didn't go anywhere, and actually get me to the next jump of having income coming in.
That's so fascinating because since we've done the online courses together, I cannot go anywhere, literally anywhere, without somebody coming up and go, "Oh, that Callie King, I just love her," and literally, if they know that I know you, they come up and tell me whether they've seen your videos or seen me on your videos. And so what's really fascinating is how personable you come across on screen now. I mean, I've never seen those early ones. I've only known you from 2014 on, but that is probably the most common comment that I get, that you're so natural on screen, you're so easy to follow, easy to listen to, easy to learn from. And I find that so fascinating. And actually, this is what I'm talking about, is sometimes we have to have some hardship or have something not work to figure out what does work. And it's so important not to be afraid to fail, or not to be afraid to have it go wrong. And I think that story that you've just told us is the perfect example of that concept, that it's not necessarily going to go right the first time, but you just have to dive in and do it again. Like I'm still learning about Zoom meetings. I thought I was going to be able to do this really cool background screen. I did it on my computer downstairs, and I came up here and it didn't work. And of course I forgot to hit record then for the first 5 minutes. But you just get better by doing it, I think, is probably the best thing to say. And that is also true of, I'm just going to change the spotlight for a second. For riding, I think this is so important. Like, we do an online course together. It's called Effortless Rider, and we've run that now for 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. And we did it again this January, launched the course and had a bunch of people sign up. And I was so fascinated by some of the comments that people were like, one woman was so convinced that her body wasn't the right body for riding, and that there had to be something physically wrong with her, which is you know, like conformationally, which is why she was struggling with her riding. And she sent me a picture of her because she was so concerned. She had 2 legs and 2 arms and a body and a head. And I had said to her, you know, there's so many people that are riding that are compromised. They either have, you know, replaced hips, replaced knees. They're, you know, might be paraplegic or quadriplegic or, you know, lost a limb, and they're riding. And that if you have a whole body, you know, you are at such an advantage to so many people that don't. But I find that riders get so hard on themselves and so critical that they lose the joy. They lose what it's all about. And I think that's one of the things that that we try to put across. I think you do and I do in our online material, is that this is supposed to be fun, and this is what we're doing for fun. And so, you know, we've got to find the joy in that.
Yeah, and you know what you shared earlier with the compliment on the video, I always really do take those to heart, because it was not easy. I am actually a very introverted person. Those that know me know that except in certain situations, I tend to be of few words, you know, like at the dinner table. And so being in front of a camera is not like a natural thing that I did or ever had any dreams to do. But it's so many hours at this point in the last 8 years that I've been in front of it, that now, whether a camera's on or it's not on, I do feel like the same person, because I'm just so used to it, you know. And I've become better at being able to organize information, just like you at the clinics, and being really good at going into a clinic and being able to see what the participants need and organize and present that information in a really clear way from the experience of doing it. And the same with the riders. It's just that keep going out and, you know, putting in the time and putting in the conscious time of, you know, really thinking about what you're doing and what you could improve, but enjoying that whole process, because it never stops. Ever.
No, it never stops. And that's the good news, is it never stops, because if it did, I think that for me, I'd leave it. I would be bored. I like something that's constantly challenging, and that there's something always to learn. And the minute I feel like I've kind of learned what I'm going to learn, I look for something new. And, you know, that's really the best way to keep our brain alive, that we can create new brain cells and make new neural connections by doing things that are novel and curious and interesting. And so, you know, one of the things I look at what's happening right now with everybody on lockdown is what an opportunity this is to do something that we wouldn't normally do, whether that's me learning Zoom meetings or you creating the mask environment. We'll talk about that in a minute, or learning a language, or, you know, picking up a book that you have always wanted to read, or decluttering. I mean, it's an opportunity for us to actually slow down a bit in our outer world and focus a bit more on our inner world and get things more organized and cleaned up, so that when we go back out, we're not encumbered by those things that are always kind of nagging at us or kind of hanging on, and, oh, I forgot to do, or, oh, I can't spend as many hours at the barn because I haven't. And so I think this is actually a real opportunity for people, rather than to look at it that way, rather than a burden. I know that it's really hard on a lot of people who have children, may have lost their job, and I'm not trying to make light of that. But we have to find something in this that's going to be meaningful on the other side of it. And I think that's what I'm really talking about.
Yeah, I had the thought just the other day, if all of the mental energy that is so easily put into worry at a time like this, and worry about things that really we can't as individuals control or have much influence over, if all that worry went into creativity, we could come out of this, and I think we will come out of it regardless, with so much new art in the form of books. You know, I know some people that are writing books right now. I know musicians that are, you know, they're writing music, they're honing their craft. Friends that do art that are doing that. So I'm actually really excited to see all of the art in the different forms that come out of this time.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so, you know, that was one of the things when we got together and we sat down, for me, one of the rewarding things about doing the online course that we did together was that I got to make sure that the work that I've been doing will have a legacy and it'll be able to be around, because I've never felt that I could replace myself by teaching somebody else what I do. I've watched a number of organizations where they try to take an individual and turn it into an organization and with a board. And the problem is that you need that central figure, that creative spark of that individual. And when that person isn't there, everybody's got a piece of it, but no one is that person because no one carries forward that person's experience. And that's what makes them unique. And so I've never tried to recreate who I am, but by doing this online course with you, it's given me the opportunity to make sure that that work isn't lost. And so I'm really grateful for that, because you know, there's a peace of mind that I know that it's there and available and will be.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel that, and that was actually one of my passions from the very start, and my vision from the very start is I always wanted to create courses with the people that I really respected and the people that I considered mentors, but I had to create the business, do the learning curve of, you know, how do I actually organize this information and do the technical pieces and all of that. And that's why for the first few years, it was just me in front of the camera and just my courses. But the vision was always to have the instructors, because I love that feeling of being able to work with, you know, work with someone like you and learn what you do and learn it on a deeper level and think about how can I translate this into a course,
Yeah.
you know, into that format.
And I know there are people that say, well, how can you learn writing from a video? How can you learn, you know, how to do what is such a physical thing by watching video? But I don't know, how many video blogs have you done now that are out on YouTube? Do you know? Because you've done one a week for how many years?
I have done, I mean, there's some articles too, so they're not all video, but I have published every Friday in the last 8 years. So 8 years of every Friday.
So 52 times 8.
Yep.
Yeah. And, you know, I've had friends, very experienced horse people, that have gone out to your YouTube channel where it's all free information and found a solution to a problem they were having, which is so fascinating for a couple of reasons. One, that there's content out there so people can go out and search it, they can find it, they can use it. But the other is that this was a particular person who's been around horses all of her life. And she even went out and was like, had a question answered. So it seems that you've somehow found a method or a way in which to recognize what your students need and then fill those needs. So how do you pick your topics? How do you, and who are you talking to when you're making these videos?
I listen to students, and that is honestly how I've picked topics since the very beginning. So in the beginning, it was the students that I was working with at the farm and taking lessons from, or doing lessons with my students there. And that was in the beginning. And then as the audience grew, I've always asked the question, as I have anytime someone signs up to my email list, I have a email that automatically goes out and basically says, what is your biggest riding problem? And we get anywhere from usually 20 to 30 at least responses to that each day. And then that gets, we're working on a better system to really put it in a objective database. But just from reading all of those, and when I need an idea, I just go back into that email archive and I read what people were asking, and then I see some common threads and I answer those questions. So that's where it comes from. It comes directly from the audience.
That is so cool, because then you know that that's a real question and it's a real problem that people are having. And like I said, people love your answers. They have always said to me, you just make it so simple and so easy and so clear. So you're very good at taking a single thought. So what's the number one riding problem that you have had asked, that people tell you about? Do you know?
In riding problems, it's usually either sitting trot or canter. So it's, how do I ride the sitting trot without bouncing, and how do I get comfortable at the canter and get a smooth canter transition? Those are the most
Yeah,
common.
and I think the canter transition, I find that is really a place where so many people seem to get stuck. And I wonder how that has come about. In other words, when I was a kid learning to ride, I took riding lessons at a stable. Mr. Davies was one of my first instructors, and he had different levels of horses, and so he knew the horse to put you on when it was time to learn another skill. And so there was a progression, and I transferred from there, and I went to Round Hill Riding Stable with Teddy Wall, and it was the same thing. He knew his horses, and he would only put you on a horse that he felt you were capable of riding, and that if there was something that you needed to learn, that you could learn that. And sadly, I don't even know that we have really riding schools in the United States anymore. I think this is something that we've lost in this country that still exists over in Europe. When you go to Europe, there's riding schools, there'll be 12 kids in a lesson, they're all going around, and there's pros and cons to that, because you're kind of a number in a class, but the horses are so patterned into what the lesson is that you get that experience of going from trot to canter, or you get that experience of sitting the trot. Whereas I don't think we just really have the school horses anymore in this country to provide that environment.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's a factor, and part of why we're working at the farm in Pennsylvania to make that bring that riding school environment to our students there and to events, and Caitlin McGarvey is the main one that's leading that now. But I also think there's something too for riders that are coming into riding and learning as adults, that there is a bit more of the anxiety that can come into riding, and then the canter just being faster can trigger more of that.
Yeah, and it's I find that the adult women that are coming to riding for the first time, in so many ways, they're still emotionally the same age they were when they were denied the horse. And one of these days I'm going to write this book that I've wanted to ride for women over 40 or 50. I have to decide which decade I'm going to, but I have found so often that when we weren't allowed to ride, say as a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old, or we had to give it up after college, that when we come back to riding later, we're still at that emotional age. And so there's this conflict between our emotional age, our physical age, and our physical body. Like we might not be as agile, we might have put on a few pounds, we might have sat at a desk for quite a while, but we still have that childlike image of ourselves, and that horse that bats his eyes at me and I fall in love, that is a sort of a dissonance. It's not congruent. And so that's where I think a lot of adult women get into trouble, because their emotional self and their physical age self is not matching up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you've started a interesting project. You want to tell us a little bit about your math project, and I'll see if anybody has any questions for you while you're doing that.
Yeah, I would love to. So this is something that I'm really excited about, and it has brought a lot of kind of meaning into my days, and is an exciting purpose for my whole team to be working on. And basically it came out of, I was, in the last few weeks, as everything has kind of escalated here with the current virus situation, I was feeling like I wanted to do something that would have a bit more of a direct impact for those affected. Especially, I have quite a few friends that work in healthcare, and a big thank you to anyone that works in healthcare or any of those industries right now. And they were just really frustrated by the shortages that they were experiencing in kind of their most basic need, which was the personal protective equipment. And then I started noticing that in my community, when I was going on and doing live videos, or like when I was just chatting with people in email, that there were several people that were already making masks. So they had pulled out their sewing machine and they were going to work, distributing them to local hospitals. And then where I'm from in Pennsylvania, where the farm is, we have a very large Amish and Mennonite community, and they refer themselves as the Plain community, and they are really, really good at responding in emergencies in a big way. And they are literally distributing masks by the thousands So just being inspired by those different stories. And then I went on to kind of start looking into that a little bit more and found that information was just kind of super scattered as far as, there were so many templates suddenly coming out for ideas of how to make masks. It was really confusing to know where to actually send them if someone did want to make, more than just enough for themselves or their family. So I figured what I'm good at is organizing information, and I have a large network of people. So that's what I started doing. I started calling all of my friends that do work as in hospitals and asking what style works best for you, and then found some templates, tested those out, and went through and confirmed a few contact points about where do masks actually need to go and what are the best materials to use to make them, and then just put it together on a resource so that those that are interested in doing that have the resources to, or maybe even know someone that does, that they could share it.
So where can they find this information?
It's at crktrainingvideos.com/cares.
I'll just put it in the chat. .com/cares. Yeah, and so, organizing, that is really, if I was to think about the one thing you're best at, it's organizing. But somebody's asked a question. They want to know what you studied in college.
Yes, so I went to Penn State. I only went for 2 years, so I got an associate's degree, and I studied ag business. So a lot of my classes, besides the liberal arts classes, the ones that you need to take for the degree program, I had a lot of classes on things like agronomy and soil management. So that was helpful as far as, having the farm and running that. And then I honestly have to say that the business classes were not super helpful. A lot of college business classes, at least you get to higher levels, are not even taught by people that necessarily have ever ran a business. So that, kind of hits to their effectiveness right from the start. But it was a good experience. I actually would go and sit in on a lot of other classes that I wasn't even enrolled in. So I did take a lot of, but I did, sit in on a lot of psych classes.
You've been a drop-in all your life.
I have. Well, I maxed out my course load and I couldn't actually take any more classes. So I just went and sat in on them instead.
That's really cool. And so somebody just said that your mask project is a good illustration of why I enjoy your approach so much. The focus is very holistic. And so in that vein, Callie, I know that your interests are super broad, and every time, like, there's months when we won't see each other, and then like we got back together and went to Costa Rica for a month and had 3 retreats. So we spent a lot of time together, but it feels like you're always kind of going out and searching little avenues here and there. So what are some of the things that you're most interested in right now, or got on the radar screen, or planning to do?
Oh, that's a good question, because there is always so much. What I really get fascinated on and kind of geek out on is, to me, that I see so many connections in everything and threads through everything that I do get. The downside of it is that I get bored quickly in just studying one thing, and I find that I can get so many new ideas for that thing going other places. So for example, for riding, or even for training, let's say, for the more of the behavior piece and the training piece specifically, I've gotten so much more out of that, not from looking at other horse trainers, but studying from dog trainers, taking classes with veterinarians that work in zoos, studying human psychology and behavior, and then seeing how that ties into the horse pieces. So right now, I am reading a book that compares and contrasts different philosophies of childhood development, and finding that really fascinating. And I like to, when there's a time of higher stress, which I would admit, even for me with managing, we do have a team, and trying to figure out where the staff that normally would be working at the farm, how they were going to fit into work that we have other places, and that it's been a time of higher stress. And I always like to take on a big physical challenge when I'm under high stress. It's, for me, that's a stress reducer, and just keeps me feeling really motivated. So I'm doing a more advanced yoga course that goes really deep into like anatomy of all, you know, the anatomy works, why you have to strengthen different parts of the body in order to be able to move into different poses. So that's my other focus. And then
I know that you do, and that's kind of one of the things that I've done. I think we have that in common, is not just look for answers within our own world, but to look for answers in worlds around us that may have something to offer. And so I've looked in the human world a lot, and like David Butler's work, Explain Pain, and of course the Feldenkrais method. But just give us a list of some of the courses or people that you've worked with, kind of just a list, so we can kind of see how broad your background is at this point.
In which sphere?
Well, what
area?
Right? So let's take exercise. I know you've done a lot of, so give us a list of the different things you've explored when it comes to exercise.
So I've gotten into long distance running, and through that read, I think it's Christopher Dougal, I think. So he had authored a book on barefoot running, and then that kind of took me into that, you know, learning about that, different running styles, especially for long distance running. Did some of that. I got into weightlifting, so then also with that, I was looking at form. I got really into nutrition. How do you do you know, different diets to kind of change your physiology along with exercise. And then yoga. And a lot of this kind of comes out of necessity, because I got too far into the weightlifting, and then I lost a lot of mobility and actually like started having back pain and stuff. So then I got into the yoga, and, you know, found a more balanced approach, and now kind of going deeper into that thread of understanding.
And there was martial arts in there too, wasn't there?
Yeah, I've done martial arts consistently for I think four or 5 years now, and still very much a beginner in it, but have done a few different arts.
And so when you take all of these different ideas and pull them together, I know there's something you're going to do this fall that August, that we're hoping is still going to happen. So how are you going to take all this information, and what is it that you're going to put it into to see how it works out?
So did you want me to talk about the trip? So I'm doing the Mangal Derby, which would have been in August. They're going to make a final decision on it here in probably about 2 or 3 weeks. It's probably going to get moved to 21.
Oh, okay.
But the Mangal Derby is a 1,000-kilometer horse race across Mongolia. And I was really excited to get accepted. I actually got my acceptance and knew that I was doing it since end of October of last year. But this is the first that I've even said it publicly anywhere, because I kind of I was building up a plan for some things that I was going to do around it. But now that I know that it's probably a year out, you know, everyone that's on this call will forget by the time we get to next year.
I don't think so. But that's one of the things is you look at different avenues and different aspects, and then you kind of set it up so that there's some way to kind of put it together and shape it into something where you can see a result. Isn't quite the right word, but sort of test yourself to see how did that work out. Because I know when you do those kinds of things, you're not going at it to win, you're going at it to best yourself, to challenge yourself. And I think that's what you do with everything, is how can you challenge yourself? And if you're not challenged, then you've got to look for something else that does stimulate you or get you captivated or keep you interested.
Absolutely. Yeah. And part of the draw for me in doing the Mangal Derby was to learn more about that culture, because I'm really fascinated by cultures where horses are a big part of their culture, but yet they view them so differently as us. And I really like, it can be a challenge, I feel, just mentally to go into those types of environments where I know going into it that they don't think of the horses as pets necessarily. They're working animals, and their standard of living is different, but so is the standard of living of the people. So to be able to go in, experience that, and experience it from the kind of ironic position of going in to do this race, that it's just, I think it'll be an interesting
Oh yeah, I think
thing all
interesting is
around.
definitely the word. I was trying to be Callie's crew, but it turns out she can't have crew. So I was really thinking I might be able to, but I was put off by what I might have to eat. So
Yeah, I was told I'm typically eat a mostly vegetarian diet, and I was told that I need to start getting used to eating meat before I go, because their diet is basically oily meat of various varieties and fermented mare's milk.
right, yeah. I think I'm beyond being able to tolerate that kind of thing. But so it's very interesting, and I think you bring up a really interesting point that we in a sense we're kind of spoiled here in the United States in that we have access to the best veterinary care and the best foot care and dental care and all this sort of thing. And so it's hard sometimes when we go into other cultures and see the way horses live in other cultures and judge it by our standards. And what I always do when I go to another culture is I look at what are the people like, because when you think about how we used to be even 30 years ago when I was a kid and how we were as a people and how we related to horses, it matched, but it matched in a ignorant isn't quite the right, but a less educated way. We did the best we could with what we had, but we had a different perspective and a different view 30 years ago that looking back on it, and this is where I always find it odd when people try to look back and judge someone 30 years ago, because it was all different 30 years ago. And so you can't put today's values on yesterday's experiences. You have to look at what was the values of the time. And that's the same kind of thing when you go into a culture. It's kind of like going back in time, and you have to look at, like when we go to Costa Rica, and one of the things, we went to a fiesta one night after hours. We jumped in the car and we drove to this fiesta. And so we watched bull riding, and there was a man and a woman, and the man was on the bull's neck facing backwards, and the woman was on the bull's back, and she got bucked off really fast, and then he rode it out for a while, and then the horsemen come in and they eventually rope the bull. But these horses are they're ridden in a manner which most people would find so offensive today in the United States. And I looked at it as this is their culture, and they're so proud of their horses and their culture. And there's a lot of what I call benign abuse or benign ignorance, because they don't even know that there's another way. And so they're doing the best they know with what they have. And we really shouldn't be judging another culture when we're in their land.
Yeah, and we also each have our own lens as to what constitutes quality of life. So, for example, to compare, what some people really want to give a horse in our culture, which is, kind of the pampered horse. They're, kept under blankets. They have a really nice stall. They live in a beautiful barn. They have a small grassy turnout. And we might see that as a high quality of life for that horse. All their medical needs are cared for. They have, the best nutrition. And comparing that to a horse that maybe, say, one of the Mongolian horses that, their training has probably been pretty rough. And when they're ridden, it might not be that pleasant in stretches, but they're also living in a herd environment on the steppe, without even a fence often, having them confined at all. So it's just, I think it's, we're not actually literally in the bodies and the minds of those horses. So it becomes a tough ethical thing to make a call of what actually is a higher quality of life.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so you've looked at a lot of different, outside of the horse world, besides like exercise and that sort of thing, you've looked into a lot of what I would categorize as philosophies or psychologies. What are some of the things that you've explored over there over the past 10 years?
That's a really good question. I get really intrigued by developmental psychology, because to me, being, working with horses and training, which, truth be told, in the whole picture, that's the part I love the most, is when I'm just in there working with a horse. And so the different psychologies that go with that of what actually creates an individual and creates behavior, whether it's a horse or a person or whatever, there are a lot of different ideas out there as to what combination of genetics and early experience and then personal choice come into that. So I would say that's looking at the different pieces that are the different philosophies and ideas and opinions on that is probably my biggest area of interest.
And so if you were to tell us sort of your current sort of view of training and horses, where are you at right now with all that?
I really am striving to work that the connection and the relationship between me and the horse is the most important thing. But looking at that with the confines of the situation that I'm working in. So, for example, I want that relationship to be very important. But if I'm working with a horse that is, there's no time pressure and I, can work with them on a frequent basis, how that's actually going to look is going to be different.
I'm just going to put up a picture here of you down in Costa Rica, by the way, while we're doing this.
Oh, yeah. How I'm going to do it, the horse is going to might have more choice right from the beginning. So that I'm working more in the early sessions at liberty with the horse loose and then kind of shaping from there and going really slowly. Whereas if I'm in a situation where it's actually with the small group of horses that I'm working with now is kind of a perfect example of this. I have a few that are in a riding program that I can really take as long as I want to get them going. So I have one horse that this is probably his 12th session. And today we just worked on taking the bit because he was being ridden, up to I think about 2 or 3 months ago. But what I noticed is when I would go up to him, even just go to touch him, he would stiffen and then start to check out a little bit right from that. So really he wasn't even comfortable with being touched. He had learned to accept it, but he wasn't actually okay with it. So we worked through being touched and then worked into being touched around the head and being able to move his head down, move his head out from pressure. And then finally today to going to actually taking the bit. So that's been 12 sessions. Another horse that in the same group had feet that were really overgrown and was starting to cause her obvious pain, even just standing around. So with her, I didn't want to take that long to get to a point, so I sped it up and I used more restraint. When I was working with her, then I would actually take the halter and lead, and I didn't do a hard and fast tie without going into, but I would, loop it around the pole so that she couldn't just walk away. She kind of had to stand there, and I was still using positive reinforcement, mostly doing a lot of reinforcement for handling her feet, but she didn't really have the choice to walk away either. So it's kind of holding those two ideas. I still wanted the connection and wanted the horse to really be there and be present and have some degree of choice, but the level of that choice had to be different in each situation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And actually, one of the things that it makes me think of is, once again, I think we're evolving, and we're evolving in horse training, moving away from a more dominance-based horse training method to one that's recognizing that really these horses are stressed, and we all are mammals, therefore we all have the vagal nerve and the vagal nerve response. And the biggest thing Vegas wants answered is, am I safe? Mm-hmm. And right now, like with what's going on in the world, that's a huge question that you just can't even go out in the street and see somebody without worrying about, am I safe? And so Vegas is like on overdrive right now. But, there's been a lot of what I would call more dominance training in the horse world, where they don't consider whether or not the horse feels safe. The horse simply has to do what they have asked him to do. And as we continue to evolve, which I think is one of the more fascinating and exciting things that we get to watch in our industry, is as we evolve, we recognize that when horses feel safe, so much of the behaviors that they're exhibiting are actually that sense of lack of safety. And if they're confined, the only thing they can do is the behaviors that are about trying to get out, or trying to leave, or trying to check out, or trying to, fooling around, my friend calls domesticated flight. And so they're doing all these adverse behaviors because they're not feeling safe. The most fundamental thing that we can offer to a person or a horse is that sense of safety.
Yeah, and that's a good one to bring up, because I know both you and I have studied polyvagal theory quite a bit, and for me more recently. But what's interesting to me too is the other layer of it, as what I perceive as safe is not necessarily what you or what the horse perceives as safe. It's an individual perception, and that whole, all those things that create the mix of each individual experiences, some amount of genetics, kind of level of sensitivity comes into that, is going to determine what that perception, what level that perception of safety comes in. And I think sometimes with some horses, that's where people get frustrated, because to them they say, well, he's just spooking at nothing, he should be punished because he's just carrying on and spooking at nothing. But that's their perception. The horse isn't actually spooking at nothing, he's reacting to something. And that's where
internal or external. And it doesn't have to be, it can be an internal reaction to a stimuli from the outside that just expresses the internal state, I think. And so this is where, one of the things for me and my whole journey with Surefoot, which started in 2012, is I've really kept evolving in the way I look at horses. And the more I've done Surefoot, the more I've realized that, we assume so much about the horse and what state he's in and how grounded he is and how secure he feels. And that's a false assumption, that we've made huge generalizations and false assumptions. And that when I start to work with a horse with the pads and see what's really underneath that, I realize that most horses are actually already quite stressed. And we've failed to recognize it because they're either in some state of freeze or slush, as my friend calls it. There's shut down, they're shutting down or shut down. And we call that calm. And it's really not calm. And that by working with Surefoot, one of the most intriguing things that I find is that the horses, in very short order, in just a few minutes, recognize that I'm safe, that to be with me is safe. And so it's interesting that I should come up with this and discover this at the same time that we're evolving in our thought and how we look at horses, and whole polyvagal theory, which I didn't know about when I started Surefoot, but certainly fits in really well.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I've shared this with you before, but I use the pads when I'm teaching just as much for the people as I do for the horses, and just having them stand on pads and get that sensory input.
Yeah. And I've told the story, I don't know recently, but I had a woman with a head injury in New Zealand, and I saw her 2 weeks after that head injury. She came off her horse. She was still having really bad headaches, and I just stuck her on the half physio pad, and her headache instantly went away. And then she slept really deeply twice that day for a couple of hours, and I saw her 2 weeks later and she was totally different. So, this same sensory input from our foot, organizing ourselves in space, proprioception, vagus nerve. The more I work with this, the more I don't think of humans and horses as different. I think of us as actually, there's so much that's alike, and we just happen to have this frontal lobe that can make up stories. Like I was going to have a background here that would have had a story, but I'll get it going next time. But that we can make up stories, and so that's really where we get into trouble, because we interpret so much of what we see in the horses, and it's an incorrect interpretation. They just simply don't have the capacity to think the kind of thoughts we attribute to them. Like, my horse should know better, or my horse knows better, or he's seen that rock 1,000 times. Why is he spooking at it today? And they're perceiving something entirely different, and we missed it.
Yeah. And the other really important thing with any kind of drawing conclusion about behavior is to, just as you said, to observe and not to jump to conclusions, because patterns of behavior are going to look different for every individual. There's some similarities through, but you have to watch the individual and get their pattern to really know what something means. For example, are they putting their head down to scratch their eye on their leg because they have an itchy eye, or are they doing it because that's what they do in a stress pattern? That's kind of the beginning of their stress response.
Right.
So
I
it's
think yawning
watching.
is a great example because horses yawn for different reasons. And so, people will go to me, that horse, why is that horse yawning? Is that a tension release or is that something else? And you have to look at it in context. You have to look at it in, has this horse done this 3 times with the same stimulus, or, is it just a random once-off event, as opposed to, again, making up a story about the whole thing that we see.
Yeah.
Yep. So we've only got a few minutes left. I do want to remind everybody that I have my Intro to Surefoot webinar tomorrow at 1 o'clock. I think it's 1 o'clock. I'll post that up on my Murdoch Method page on Facebook so that the link is there. I'm going to talk about the Surefoot pads. And I'm doing the intro again because last week I forgot to hit the record button. So at the very end of the hour, I discovered this. At least today, I discovered it within the first 5 minutes. Oh, hi, Frida. And then next week, my guests are Sharon Wilsey on Monday, Bob Belker on Wednesday, Felicitas on Tuesday, and Thursday is Robin Hood from the T-Touch. And yes, Callie is great. And Callie, it really actually is impressive just how much you've packed into your short life.
I don't like to waste time. No grass is growing at its feet.
No, absolutely not. No grass is going to. And by the way, if there's ever any it's muchacha, what is it? Music? What's the dance? And Callie's around and it's getting dark. She'll be on the dance floor, so don't worry that she is a 29-year-old in there. I have seen it.
Yeah, I'm mostly an introvert until the lights go down and the music comes up. Then it's game on.
So if nobody has any questions, we're gonna bring this to a wrap. Callie, how can people find you if they're not by? Probably most everybody is familiar, but in case somebody watches this video.
The best is to go to crktrainingblog.com, and there's links from there from pretty much everything we do, from the farm to the videos and lots of research.
Yep. And right now you've got all the online courses opened up for people that if they need something in order to be able to improve their riding, they can go out there and join. I have 3 courses out there, and I don't know how many courses altogether. You have Heidi's and
yeah, we have 10 courses and 3 with Wendy, the effortless rider that we talked about at the beginning, ABCs to on the aids, which is actually my favorite course and probably the most, like, I feel it gets too little attention. It's a movement course recognizing movement in horse and rider, and then the effortless jumping course, which is a really good one too, most recent one.
Yep. So I'll post this video, and if you share it with your friends and enjoyed it, I'll be back here again next week. So thanks so much for signing in, and thank you, Callie, for coming on as a guest. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good
nice to turn the tables once, and interview you instead of being the
I know. Yeah, this was fun.
All right. Well, happy mask making, and everybody stay safe.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye.